My brother was standing in the doorway of my condo wearing my Vancouver Canucks hoodie, the one I'd left on the coat rack, with a coffee mug in his hand like he owned the place. Because apparently, he thought he did. I had just driven 4 hours from a work conference in Calgary. It was February. It was -18. I had my suitcase, my work bag, and exactly 0 patience left. And my brother looked at me the way you look at a door-to-door salesperson and said, "You should have called ahead. We're kind of settled in. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I bought that condo myself. Every single dollar of the down payment came from 7 years of working as a civil engineer, eating instant noodles through my mid-20s, and skipping every vacation my friends went on. The unit was in Burnaby, just outside Vancouver. 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, underground parking. I paid $740,000 for it in 2021 when the market briefly dipped. My name was on the title. My name was on the mortgage. There was no other name anywhere on any document related to that property. So when my brother told me I should have called ahead, I genuinely thought he was joking. He was not joking. I said, "Move. I need to get inside." He leaned against the doorframe and told me that my sister-in-law, his wife, had been having a really hard time with the pregnancy, that the doctor had recommended reduced stress, and that they'd just gotten comfortable. He said this like it explained everything, like comfort was a legal concept. I pushed past him. My sister-in-law was on my couch, feet up on my coffee table, watching something on my television. She looked up at me and smiled. Not an apologetic smile. A settled smile. The smile of someone who has decided they live somewhere. My mother was in my kitchen. She was making tea with my kettle, in my mugs, and she turned around and said, "Oh good, you're here. We were wondering when you'd show up." I stood in my own living room with my suitcase, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger yet. Something quieter. Something that was paying very close attention. I want to explain something about my family so the rest of this makes sense. I am the oldest of 3 children. My brother is 2 years younger than me. My younger sister lives in Toronto and has nothing to do with this story. Growing up, my brother was my parents' project. He was charming and funny and he struggled in school, and every resource the family had went toward keeping him comfortable. I was the one who got a part-time job at 16. I was the one who applied for every scholarship I could find. I was the one who, when I got into university, was told by my father that he was proud of me, and also that they wouldn't be able to help much financially, but he was sure I'd figure it out. I figured it out. My brother figured out how to marry someone whose parents had money, and then how to spend it faster than it came in. By the time this happened, he and my sister-in-law had been going through what my mother called a rough patch, which, translated, meant they had burned through her family's financial support, accumulated significant debt, and were looking for somewhere to land. They'd been renting a place in Langley, but I found out later they'd been evicted 2 weeks before they showed up at my door. They hadn't told me that. They had apparently told my mother, and my mother had given them the spare key I'd left with her for emergencies. That night, I slept in my own bed because I refused to leave. My brother slept on the pull-out in the 2nd bedroom with my sister-in-law. My mother went home. The next morning I called a real estate lawyer named Patricia, who a colleague had used for a property dispute the year before. I told her everything. She asked me 3 questions. Was my name the only name on the title? Yes. Had I ever given written permission for anyone to stay there? No. Did I have documentation of the key being given without my consent? I said I would get it. Here is the thing Patricia told me that I did not expect. She said, "Don't call the police yet." I said, "Why not?" She said, "Because if you call the police right now, they will likely treat it as a civil matter since your family has a key and no doors were broken. It will take longer, it will be messier, and it will give them time to create a paper trail, medical letters, pregnancy documentation, anything that muddies the water. If we do this correctly, we move faster than they can react." I want to address something directly because I know what people think when they hear this part of the story. They think, "Why didn't you just call the cops?" And the answer is that I asked the same question, and the person I was paying $380 an hour told me exactly why, and she was right, and I listened to her. That is the answer. Patricia sent a formal notice to vacate to my address via registered mail and courier the following day. She also sent a letter directly to my brother's last known address in Langley. She documented everything. She contacted the building management to note that the unit was my sole property, and that any guests were there without authorization. She asked me to gather everything: mortgage statements, the title document, the original purchase agreement, email records, anything in writing. I had everything. I am an engineer. I keep records. While Patricia was working, I did something my brother would later describe in a very unfortunate text message as cold. I went back to the condo. I was calm. I brought food. I sat down with my brother and my sister-in-law and I said, "I understand you're in a hard situation. I'm not trying to make your life worse. But this is my home, and I need a clear date from you, a real date, not a vague plan for when you'll be out. My sister-in-law put her hand on her stomach and said, "We just need a little more time. I can't be stressed right now. The baby." I said, "I understand. 2 weeks." My brother said, "That's not enough time to find something." I said, "I know, which is why I'm telling you now." My mother called me that night. She said I was being heartless. She said family doesn't do this to family. She said my sister-in-law was 7 months pregnant and I was going to put her out in February. I said, 2 weeks is February 28th. That's not the middle of winter. That's the end of it. And I'm not putting anyone anywhere. I'm asking them to leave my home. My mother said, "You always have to be right." I said goodnight, and I hung up. 2 weeks passed. They did not leave. My brother sent me a text saying they needed another month. He said they had found a place, but the move-in date was March 30th. He said, "And I need you to actually read this. You have a good job and you own property. We have nothing right now. This is what family is for." I forwarded that text to Patricia. She filed for an expedited eviction order through the BC Supreme Court. Because the property was mine alone, because there was no lease, no rental agreement, no financial arrangement of any kind, and because I had documented notice that had been ignored, the hearing was scheduled for the following week. My brother did not hire a lawyer. My sister-in-law sent a letter, I assume she wrote it herself, saying that eviction during pregnancy constituted undue hardship and requesting a delay. The judge read it. He also read Patricia's submission, which included the title document, the mortgage in my name, the registered notice they had ignored, the building management correspondence, and the text message where my brother explained that I had a good job and owned property as justification for occupying my home. The judge granted the eviction order. They had 72 hours to vacate. He noted in his ruling that the respondents had presented no legal basis for their occupancy and that pregnancy, while a circumstance deserving sympathy, did not constitute a right to occupy private property belonging to a third party. My sister-in-law cried in the hallway outside the courtroom. My brother looked at me like I had done something to him. My mother, who had attended, did not speak to me. She put her arm around my sister-in-law, and they walked to the elevator. I stood there with Patricia, and I felt nothing, and then I felt everything, and then I felt nothing again. That is the truest way I can describe it. What happened next is the part of this story that I did not see coming. When my brother and sister-in-law were packing up the condo under the supervision of a bailiff, because Patricia had advised me not to be present alone, my mother decided to help them move. In doing so, she took several things from my unit that did not belong to them. A Vitamix blender I had bought myself, a set of Le Creuset pots that had been a gift from a colleague when I got promoted, my spare set of AirPods, 2 bottles of wine from a rack near the kitchen that had collectively cost about $280. I noticed when I returned. I texted my mother and told her what was missing. She said she thought those items had been part of what they were using and that she'd have my brother return them. 3 days later, nothing had been returned. I texted my brother. He said the blender was probably somewhere, and the pots had maybe gotten mixed in with their stuff. The AirPods he claimed not to have seen. Patricia sent another letter. This one outlined the missing items by description and estimated value, and noted that removal of personal property from a residence during a court-supervised eviction could constitute theft under the Criminal Code of Canada. She gave them 5 business days to return the items or provide compensation. The pots and the blender came back the following Thursday. They were returned by my mother, who left them outside my door without knocking. She did not include the AirPods or the wine. She did, however, leave a handwritten note that said, "I hope you're happy." I kept the note. I keep everything. For about 6 weeks, I had no contact with my brother or my parents. My father, who had stayed out of the court proceedings entirely, sent me one email that said he hoped I would consider the long-term damage to the family and reminded me that relationships matter more than property. I wrote back a single sentence. The property is what allowed me to have stable housing. The relationship is what put that housing at risk. He did not respond. Then I found out about the debt. A friend who works in financial services mentioned, in a completely unrelated conversation, that my brother had apparently listed my condo address as his primary residence on a credit application sometime in the 3 weeks they had been staying there. I don't know exactly what he applied for or through which institution. What I do know is that when I ran my credit report, there was an inquiry I did not recognize, dated during the period they were in my unit, associated with my address. I called Patricia. She connected me with a colleague who specialized in fraud. I won't use his name, but I will tell you he was very calm and very methodical, and within 2 business days he had a clearer picture than I did. My brother had not just used my address. He had used a combination of my address, my name, and what appeared to be a fabricated employment reference to apply for a line of credit. The application had been declined, which was why I hadn't been notified, but the attempt was documented. This is the part of the story where things stopped being about a condo. The fraud file went to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. I gave them everything: the credit report, the timeline, Patricia's documentation from the eviction, the text messages, the note from my mother. The investigator I spoke to was professional and thorough and told me it might take time. I said I understood. My brother called me 2 months later. It was a Sunday morning. He said he wanted to talk. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said his wife had had the baby, a boy, healthy, born in late March at a hospital in Surrey, because they had found an apartment in Surrey, which they had apparently been able to afford this entire time, and that he wanted to move forward. He said, "You're going to be an aunt. Doesn't that matter to you?" I said, "I want you to know that I have cooperated fully with an investigation into what you did with my name and my address. I don't know where that process is right now. That's not in my hands anymore. But I want you to know that I know." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't think it would actually go through." I said, "That's not the point." He said, "Are you trying to get me arrested?" I said, "I reported what happened. What happens next isn't my decision." He hung up. I learned through my father, 3 weeks later, that my brother had retained a criminal defense lawyer. My father called to tell me this in a tone that suggested I had caused the problem. I listened to the whole call. When he was finished, I said, "Dad, your son used my name to commit financial fraud. I'm not the one who did something wrong here." My father said, "Everything is always black and white with you." I said, "No, but fraud is." The investigation concluded 4 months after that. My brother was charged with identity fraud and attempted fraud under the criminal code. The charges were serious enough that his lawyer negotiated a resolution. I was told the details would not be shared with me unless I was called as a witness, which I was not. What I do know is that it resulted in a criminal record and conditions that included financial counseling and repayment of associated legal and administrative costs. My sister-in-law sent me a message through Instagram. It was long. It talked about the baby, about how hard the past year had been, about how she had never meant for things to go this far. It was well written, and I believe she meant most of it. I did not respond. I don't say that with pride. I say it because I had nothing left to give to that conversation, and I knew it. My mother and I have not spoken since she left the pots outside my door. My father and I exchange occasional emails. They are polite and distant, the way emails between people who used to know each other well can sometimes be. I still live in the condo. I changed the locks the day after the eviction. I updated the building management with a strict instruction that no key copies were to be provided to anyone under any circumstances without my written authorization. I bought new AirPods. I did not replace the wine. I bought better wine. I think about my nephew sometimes, my brother's son, who is now almost a year old and has no idea any of this happened. I think about what I would say if I met him someday, when he's older and asking questions about his family. I don't have an answer for that yet. What I do know is this: I worked for everything I have. I asked for nothing from anyone. I built a life that was stable and mine, and when people who were supposed to love me decided that stability was a resource available to them, I defended it. Not because I am cold, not because I don't understand hardship, but because the moment you let someone take what's yours without consequence, you are not being kind. You are teaching them that it worked. It did not work. I am 31 years old. I own my home. My name is the only name on the title, and it always will be. And the spare key now lives in a lockbox in my closet, with a combination that only I know. If you're watching this because something similar is happening to you, and I think some of you are, I want you to hear me clearly. Document everything. Get a lawyer before you get emotional. Do not let anyone tell you that protecting yourself is the same as being cruel. And do not, under any circumstances, leave your emergency key with someone who has your brother's phone number. That's the part I should have known from the beginning.